On the night of the 7th of September 1941, a bomb fell on Grimsby Rd, Louth. It destroyed a house and a bungalow, killed 7 people and injured 8, 5 of them seriously. It was Louth's worst night of the Second World War. Most of the fatalities were at 32 Grimsby Road, the house owned by Arthur Janes. Arthur lost his wife, May Elizabeth Janes, his mother-in-law, Elizabeth Ward, his daughter, Mary Janes, his brother-in-law, Walter Hallett, Walter's daughter, Jean, and Walter's brother, Roland. John Janes, Arthur's son, was seriously injured, but Margaret Janes, who was to become Margaret Ottaway, the Mayor of Louth, escaped completely unharmed. Violet Hallett, Walter's wife, and Anne Hallett, Roland's wife, was seriously injured. Next door, Mrs Timms was killed, and in several of the adjacent properties people were injured, some of them seriously. 65 years on, the events of the night are recalled in vivid detail by my mother, Connie Clark. At the time she was Connie Platt and lived at 35 Eastgate, Louth. That's the grocer's shop at the bottom of New Street that is now Wright's the stationer's. She was engaged to my father, Police Constable Bill Clark, who was on duty on the night, attended the scene and identified several of the bodies. The Platt family were very close to the Janes family and intended to spend the evening with them in Grimsby Road. But by a fortuitous turn of events, that didn't happen. Had they been there, I might not have been here today. Right, Mother, I think it was intended that you would go up to Grimsby Road that evening. Why didn't you go?
Because we went up to see Mrs Janes that morning, and whilst we were there, Violet, that's Arthur's sister, rang up to say her brother-in-law was home on leave. He'd got some petrol. Could they come over for the afternoon? And Mrs Janes, of course, said, yes, do. So we said, well, we won't come. We can come any time. And we didn't.
That's we being you?
Me, my mother, and my 2 sisters.
Right, that's Ivy and Elsie.
That's right.
Right.
Ivy went up to have tea because she was most friendly with them all.
But she came away.
And when the siren went, Arthur Janes was on duty, Dorothy Janes was on duty.
That's Arthur's daughter.
Arthur's daughter. So they brought Ivy home. Arthur went to the police station on duty, and
so he was a special constable.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Dorothy went to the the warden's post.
Right.
On duty.
She was an air raid warden.
That's right.
Yeah.
So we sat in the room talking, and a bit later on we heard a plane go over, and don't ask me why, but we knew when it was a German plane. It had a different sound. So we therefore knew there was a German around. We heard the bomb fall, and Ivy, my sister, who was very deaf, was very upset because I told them to get on the floor, and of course she didn't know what was happening. And much to our amazement, when it was dropped, I said to her, you can get up now, Ivy. She said, well, what was it? What's happened? So I said, well, there's been a bomb and it wasn't far away. And she said, funnily enough, you know, all worked up about it. And I said, look, we're all right, don't worry about it. And strangely enough to relate, she said, what about Mrs Janes? And I always think that was very, very weird that she should say that.
Why weren't you in an air raid shelter?
Well, we were sick to death of going in an air raid shelter.
Because that was the one under the market hall where the cellars now is.
No, we used to go under the market hall,
right.
And then we had a table shelter, which was a metal bottom and a metal top with mesh side in it.
Like a strong
and
cage.
we had a mattress in it, and we were supposed to go in there and lay there. and it was absolutely horrible, so we didn't used to go in.
Right.
I wish...
You wish you obviously had. So what happened then?
Well, later on we had a special constable come, Mr Clough, that used to keep the shoe shop in the marketplace, who was a great friend of Arthur Jane's, came and told us, you know, what had happened, that there'd been a hit up there, but we didn't know any details. Quite a while afterwards, Arthur was brought down to our house. He came into the room and of course told us the worst, that Mrs James was killed and little Mary. And we said, what about John and Margaret? And he said, well, he wasn't sure about Margaret, but he thought she was all right. And John had been taken to the clinic. Now, I was a Red Cross worker, but I wasn't on duty that night, therefore I wasn't at the clinic. But Arthur said, will you go? And I said, of course. So I put my uniform on and went round to the clinic, which was in Queen Street. And I found John, and he was really, really thrilled to see me. And I looked after him and talked to him. When he wanted to pass water, I went and get him a bottle, realised it was blood in the urine, so I took it straight to the doctor, and he had to go straight to the hospital. And so they took John from the clinic up to the hospital. Also at the clinic was Anne,
that's
Roland's wife, who of course knew nobody in Louth at all.
But they were from Grimsby.
As they were from Grimsby. And so therefore, when the all clear went, I said, you better come round home with me, Anne. So we walked to my house, where I lived with Mother, and of course when I got there it was just like Piccadilly Circus, because Arthur was there and people were coming in, and my sister, Mrs Forbes, had come up. Nellie, and was helping, and it was like hell let loose in there, believe me. During all this chaos at my mother's, and it was chaos, we were all trying to do our best and help each other, Anne, that's Roland Hallett's wife from Grimsby, who I'd taken home with me, suddenly said, Connie, my head hurts. And when I looked in her hair, which was full of mortar and plaster, there was the biggest cut I think I shall ever see in my life, and I knew it had to be stitched. So I said to my sister, Elsie, on the quiet, I mouthed it, you know, this has got to be stitched. And she said, how are we going to get her to the hospital? And believe it or not, our doorbell rang. And somebody went to the door, and it was Bill Clark, who I was engaged to, a policeman. And he came in looking absolutely like us all, I suppose, because he'd just identified some bodies. And I told him about Anne. So he said, well, I better take her up in the police car, but you'll have to come with me. And it's the only time I ever went in a police car with my fiancé, ever. We took her up to the county and left her there, of course, and came back and carried on. And then eventually Dorothy and I went upstairs and laid on my bed. We didn't...
Sorry, Dorothy being...
Miss Dorothy James.
Yeah.
She had come from the point...
The air raid
wardens point, when the all clear went. They told you to go to Mrs Platt's and not to go home. So she came to us. And my mother, a very, very strong personality, when the doorbell went, she said, this'll be Dorothy. Now, we'd no lounge, we'd only got one room, which was full of people. And my mother went to let Dorothy in, and stood in our shop, a little grocery shop, and told her what had happened. And I always admired my mother a lot, because it must have been very hard for her, because we were all very fond of Mrs James, and little Mary as well. It was heartbreaking, believe me. Anyway, eventually we went to lay on the bed. We hadn't been in bed long when the doorbell went, So I went down, and Dorothy, and my brother, and there stood my future husband and the police sergeant that sort of got mixed up with the bodies. They couldn't find one body, and they'd got one extra in the hospital. When they got it all sorted out, they thought the body in the hospital was Tim's, and it wasn't. It was Roland Hallett, Anne's husband, who I'd just taken up to hospital about 3 hours previously. So that was another upset. Anyway, that was a police matter, and they dealt with that. It was nothing to do with us. And the next day I had to go to work at the chemist shop, and I went, and I was as right as ninepence till I got there, never shed a tear. And as soon as I got to work, I went to pieces, and everybody was so lovely with me, and anyway, we got through it all. The funeral, of course, went from Mother's. It was terrible. Len James, who was in the Air Force, stationed at Catford on a balloon site, he came home, so he was stopping with us. John, of course, was in the hospital.
Because he had a kidney out?
No, he didn't have a kidney out. He'd damaged his spleen.
Oh, right.
That's why he passed blood. And the funeral was unbelievable. The streets were lined from my mother's house right up to the cemetery. And what upset me personally that day was when we went up Upgate, on the corner opposite Hanson's shop, there stood 2 Grenadier Guards. Very, very smart the guards were, and they just stood there at full salute, because they had come to my mother's house many a night, as they were billeted just round the corner from our shop, and played cards with us and Mrs. James more than once. And it was very moving. I can still see them standing there today.
So what happened to Arthur and Margaret and John? I mean, where did they all live?
Well, John and Arthur stayed with us. Len went back on duty, of course. I can't remember what...
Dorothy did?
No, Dorothy went back to the Wrens. She went into the Wrens, Dorothy did eventually. And Margaret stayed at Mr. and Mrs. John Clark's. And probably 2 weeks after, they brought all the things from 32 Grimsby Road to Arthur's garage in Maiden Row, and it was very, very upsetting. Dorothy and I went down one afternoon. There was all these sacks of clothes and things. You know, you bought a little dress out and you knew it was Mary's, and then you picked up a jumper and it was Mrs. Jane's, and we had to go through all those things. It was heartbreaking for us. But we did it, and Ivy helped as well, and we got through all that. And Arthur lived with us until he bought a house in Upgate.
And then the family were reunited.
Then the family sort of really got together again, and we used to go up as usual, and we carried on from there.
Why weren't the Janes family, why didn't they take shelter?
I've no idea, because they'd had a lovely brick shelter built.
In the garden?
In the garden. There were bunks and little cupboard with everything in and that, but I think everybody was fed up of raids and what have you, and of course there were too many for them all to go in the shelter.
Right.
And you couldn't let 3 little girls go in on their own very well, could you?
No.
So therefore, Mrs. Janes put Margaret Janes and little Jean Hallett and little Mary Janes all in the bed in the front room. They'd got a bed downstairs. And if only they'd been in the shelter, but you're always wise after the fact, aren't you?
And where were the others in the house when the bomb fell?
Well, I think John, I don't know where John was, because he walked out of the building. I know that for a fact, but he was very, wobbly, and they took him straight down to the clinic.
But the Halletts were in the drive?
Roland Hallett and Walter Hallett, had said they'd better go home, and they'd gone out to sort of get the car revved up and ready. And of course they got a direct hit, which was terrible. And Violet and Anne were in the house, and
Mrs Janes and Mrs.
Mrs.
Ward.
Janes and Mrs. Ward. So it was a pity it all happened, wasn't it?
Very sad. Well,
It was sad.
Thanks very much for recalling that. I'm sure that'll be of very great interest.
They were very great friends of ours. We were like really one big family. I was friendly with Dorothy, who's my age. You know, we were all interlocked and had been for years. And we loved them all very much, believe me.
And but for a gallon of petrol, you'd have been there.
Yes, probably so. Well, we would have been up there, definitely.
Those are the recollections of 85-year-old Connie Clark in conversation with her son David, recorded on the 28th of March 2006.